G'day everyone, Clok-Roo reporting. Now, I know that I hinted I was going to do a video on a franchise other than Skylanders or Crash Bandicoot as my next one, and I still stand by that, as I am working on a Pokemon-themed countdown as we speak, but this particular matter warrants discussion. Big discussion. Now, the stimulus behind this video came from an article I read, courtesy of notice from a friend of mine known as Crystal Blazier. Some of you might know as the admin of the Skylanders wiki, the Skylanders Academy fan forum, and by the YouTuber of the same name. Now, this article was about what David Siller thinks of the Crash Bandicoot remasters, and needless to say, I don't agree with him at all. Before we go any further, we need to clear some things up. Who is David Siller and why is he arcing up? David Siller was one of the original quote-marked creators of Crash Bandicoot. Now when I say quote-marked, I mean he is one of 3 people who feel as though they didn't get the recognition for the series' creation as deserved. We all know about Jason Rubin, Andy Gavin, and Mark Cerny, but we forget about Charles Emlis, Joe Pearson, and the man of the moment, David Siller. If his name doesn't ring a bell, allow me to remind you of where he is coming from. Back in August of 2015, so last year as of this video's release, Chris Mawson of Power Up Gaming did an article on how Mr. Siller feels as though he has been forgot about and blackballed by Naughty Dog and Universal. As of late, Chris Mawson did another article on David Siller, this time with his reactions and response to the Insane Trilogy remasters. While Siller was initially positive in his views, he immediately turned ugly. I will admit though, the quote that I'm about to read to you is probably the only thing he said that I can actually get behind, and I will explain afterwards why, but there is no mistaking the harsh intentions of these words. Quote, "Was this project even a good idea? I am not sure that it was. I would have Activision/Sony build an amazing all-new next-generation Crash Bandicoot game that would amaze and enthrall everyone from then to now, meaning new customers and the fanatic old ones as well." End quote. He did say a little bit after that, but it's pretty much more of what he just said there. Now, I support these words to the extent that he does make a valid point. In my last video, I did remark how I would prefer a reimagining of the first game over a reboot, remake, or remaster of the entire original series, because there's a lot more of untouched potential lying in the first game, and I can definitely imagine several aspects from later games working their way into it to create something original and new that would start the franchise over, but not act alien to the franchise name. And that last part is critical to this video, because I think David has kind of gone mad. Before I continue, I probably should clarify where Charles Emlis and Joe Pearson stand on these matters. Charles Emlis, as far as I know, simply doesn't care anymore. I haven't heard a word from him about what he thinks about the remasters, or anything about Crash Bandicoot as of late. Though the one thing I do know is that his original designs were used in the development of Crash Nitro Car, so that should give some faith that his designs are being used again for this Insane Trilogy. Joe Pearson, meanwhile, seems to have just moved on and accepted the turn of events. From last year's article, I quote, "Andy and Jason didn't steal from Charles and I. We were paid to work on the game on a standard work-for-hire contract. Perhaps our contributions were arguably worth 3 or 4 times what we were paid for, but it was our choice to accept the terms of the contract and the money offered, so I never had an issue with that." End quote. Now, while Pearson has shown that he is okay with how things have turned out, even if he technically did get ripped off, he is quoted here again saying, quote, "Now that I understand how Naughty Dog systematically went out of their way to cut David out of the credit loop for his huge role in the game, my walking away from Naughty Dog was perhaps the best idea." End quote. You notice how he chose to exclude Siller from the first quotation, yet singling him out in the second? It kind of gives you the idea that David Siller is really upset about this. In fact, he's pretty much out for blood, but he's instead making himself look like a tool. Not the workshop kind, by the way. Now, I'm no video game developer myself, but I have at least enough of an understanding to establish what is a good idea, what works for a video game/franchise, and what is just stupid. Going back to the point he made about moving forward, David Siller himself has put forward a potential idea for what he thinks could be a new Crash Bandicoot game. And please let it be a joke. Quote, "An all-new Crash Bandicoot game for PS4 should be starring Crash's own kid and his kid's crew. He can flash back and even tell stories of what his dad told him about back in the day, while blazing a new trail including great new adventures and abilities, including techno gadgets that are awesome. Maybe this is actually Coco's child, but indeed the franchise could have and should now move into the future." End quote. I'm sorry, what? I've got to be blunt here, guys. This is a terrible idea for a Crash Bandicoot game. I honestly cannot see this working in any capacity, okay? Now, before any of you start judging me, for what I think, okay? Let me make it clear that I have my own idea for a Crash Bandicoot game, okay? And even I don't like it, and I want to forget about it. Basically, the idea is this. It's an RPG-style game set in the 10th dimension, with Crash somehow being teleported there, and then teams up with all these characters that would otherwise be enemies in the normal games. But because it's set in the 10th dimension, they are all good guys. I even imagine Crash having a voice and having a love interest in a character named Crystal. Brilliant idea, no? Oh wait, sorry, that's the response answer. No, it's a bad idea. Really bad idea. It's probably an even worse idea than what David is suggesting here, but it kind of gives you an idea of how terrible some ideas can be when they aren't properly thought out, or even put down into a design treatment and then forgot about for a year, so that when you uncover them again later on, you realize how good or bad these ideas are then. See, this is the thing about game development. You can't just come up with an idea and expect it to work. You actually have to think about it and have the support of others and even yourself. Straight up backing your own plan on your own is a one-way ticket to creating a disaster without bothering to think about how terrible the idea really is. Let me give you a converse idea. YouTuber CrashLesson25 created his own video over a year ago about what he thinks would work as a reimagining for the first Crash Bandicoot game to bring the series back. Not relevant now, but the argument will remain. Looking back at the idea now, I can safely say that it is a brilliant idea. Not because I believe in the idea of a reimagining, that video actually gave me the initial thought, but because I genuinely believe it to be a good idea. I even took the idea and created a more proper design treatment and some design documents for the potential game. That kind of goes to show how good an idea really is when you look back on a year-old video and go, that's a bloody good idea. While on the contrary, you look at an idea that's barely even a week old and think to yourself, what is this shit? If I'm not making any sense, I'll dumb it down for you a bit more. Let me remind you that David Siller wants to build an all-new and next-generation Crash Bandicoot game, which basically means something different. Quote, as a game designer, creator, and producer, I would have taken the course of something new and dynamic that begs to be born over rehashed games. Show the world what you can do. End quote. Okay, here's what's going to happen now. I'm going to give you all a brief description of a potential Crash Bandicoot game. What about a Crash Bandicoot brawler where you fight larger enemies with combat moves, take control of them, and then use those enemies to fight larger enemies? Sound familiar? It should, it's Crash of the Titans. But for this scenario, wipe that game from existence, legitimately and actually pretend it doesn't exist, nor does Crash Mind of a Mutant, and focus instead on the idea. Now tell me, if you were forced to pick, which idea do you prefer? This idea for a brawler, or Siller's idea for however you describe it? I thought about this myself, and I actually think that the brawler would make a better idea for a Crash Bandicoot game. Not because we've already got them and I know what they look like, but if we forget that Crash of the Titans and Mind of a Mutant exists already, I've already asked you for that, I can still see the idea for a Crash Bandicoot brawler being a thing. Figuratively speaking, this is pretty much what David is asking for. But there's a catch. We have Crash of the Titans and Crash Mind of a Mutant, and they bring about with them a catch-22. They're not popular games by a mile. Sales were good, reviews and scores were mixed to great. Fan reception, however, was pretty bad. For pre-existing fans, only the most die-hard and dedicated of them, myself included, can actually find these games fun. But it just shows you how much the fanbase just didn't accept the changes that were made, and that they weren't accepting of Radical Entertainment's desire to move forward with the series. Similar problems have happened to other gaming franchises, probably the most notable of these being Spyro the Dragon. We go from classic Spyro, which is popular, to the Legend of Spyro trilogy, which lost a lot of the fanbase, to Skylanders, which created a divide between the retro fanbase and the Skylander fanbase, with me being on the latter team. The same thing happened with the Sonic Boom series. The fanbase started bagging the series even before Rise of Lyric and Shattered Crystals were released, and were really unhappy with the changes that were made, redesigns in particular, which again is a pity because I like the Sonic Boom series as a whole and was able to get into it, as opposed to the main series, which I just cannot be bothered investing in. What these examples show is that fan bases do not want to progress forward, and while I think that is a really bad mindset to have, it's the harsh fact of gaming reality. Even MacPat of Game Theory did a video that explains that we as a gaming community don't want to move forward and progress through change. We want the same thing as what we have and what we had in the past. Even Siller himself admits this. Quote, "They will especially sell this to everyone that already has it and a few more. Sure, old is new again. Just look at the mini NES." End quote. This is what Nintendo does well with its series. As an example, let's use Mario. While you can take the first game on the NES and put it alongside the more recent Super Mario 3D World and see the jarring differences between them, when you put each and every Mario platformer side by side each other all together all the way up to now, you will see that not much changes between each game, but they all add up to some massive differences in the end. The long and the short is that you can pick up any Mario platformer and still know exactly how to play it even if it is your first time. You can tell that Crash Bandicoot went in this direction as well with Crash Twinsanity. Personally, I don't like Twinsanity, but there is no denying that this is what the next step forward for the franchise as a platforming series was meant to be, going from linear levels to open world. So you would think that someone who works in gaming and produced Crash Bandicoot would recognize how the fanbase feels about new and drastically different ideas on the table. But apparently, David Siller has shown that he's ignorant to that. In fact, he's even got his own wording and facts completely wrong. Quote, "If this franchise deserves to live, then pump life into it, not a Frankensteinian effort. Why could this have not been offered on the PS3? Okay, first of all, Frankenstein was the doctor, not the monster. Even so, the implications of what he said remain the same. But they're still wrong, because the story of Frankenstein is that he made his monster from several pieces of the dead. He did not revive a single dead entity, which is pretty much what is happening with Crash in the Insane Trilogy. A true example of a Frankenstein Crash game would be the original version of the fan game Crash Bandicoot Crystal's Wrath. And those are not my words either. Those came direct from one of the guys that are making the game. Pat Strikes Back and Jump Button CM openly admitted that the original game was a cobbled mess of several ideas from across the Crash Bandicoot franchise, so they scrapped it and started over. Now, I don't care who you are or how much you like the Crash Bandicoot franchise. You have to admit that that was a smart move on their behalf to start over. If you're not happy with your own product, why go through with it? Siller seems to be ignorant to the basics of your mentality in the video game development industry. What I think the problem really is here with Siller is that he is still bitter over not being credited for his involvement with the franchise's initial creation. And you can tell because he is singled out and not so much as demeaned, but more insulted Jason Rubin by straight up calling him a bully. And to try and get that credit, he then proceeds to upload some of his original sketches for design documents for the first Crash Bandicoot game to the Untold Story of Crash Bandicoot Facebook page, a page which he set up so that he, Zemblitz, and Pearson would be recognized for their efforts. However, while Zemblitz and Pearson seem to be a lot more restrained and not as vocal, Siller is clearly very vocal about the matter. It's apparent that he is unhappy about the lack of credit he received in the creation of Crash Bandicoot and wants to try and rectify that. But if you ask me, I think we're doing good to just accept the facts and move on. I'm the Primordial Clok-Roo, and I promise you that the next video won't have anything to do with Crash or Skylanders. Promise!